Okay, so welcome everyone. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be available on social media. Please remain muted during the entire event. At this time, I ask you to turn off your video to maximize the quality of the recording. Only the readers and hosts will have their video on. To maximize your viewing, click on Speaker View at the top right-hand corner. Benvenuti a tutti e a tutte. Si noti che questo evento verrà registrato e sarà disponibile sui social media. Si prega di disattivare il vostro microfono per tutta la durata dell'evento. In questo momento vi chiediamo anche di disattivare il vostro video per massimizzare la qualità della registrazione. Solo i partecipanti e gli host avranno il video attivo. Per massimizzare la visualizzazione, cliccate su Speaker View in alto a destra. Grazie. I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Bonjour à tous, benvenuti, benvenute. My name is Christine Sansalone, and I am the host of this event. The AICW is pleased to present the second event of the series, A Feast of Creativity, readings by established AICW writers. Benvenuti a tutti e grazie di essere qui. L'Associazione di Scrittori e Scrittrici Italo-Canadesi è lieta di presentare il secondo evento della serie dedicato ai nostri autori di successo. I recognize that we are on different territories at this time, but I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that I am located on unceded Indigenous lands of the Atikamekw, Anishinaabe, and Wanapitei First Nations. The Association of Italian Canadian Writers acknowledges them and other nations who care for the land across our country, and we pay our respects to Canada's first storytellers. Today we will listen to Nino Famà, Terri Favro, Anna Foschi Ciampolini, Connie Guzzo McParland, and Michael Mirolla. Each reader will have 12 minutes at their disposal. Feel free to type any comments on the chat. We will give you the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the event. With no further ado, I'm going to call to the mic our first speaker, Nino Famà. Nino was born in Barcellona, Messina. He is the author of many works of fiction in Italian, including Il sogno di Toloma, L'oceano nel pozzo, La stanza segreta, and a collection of short stories, Don Gaudenzio, published by Edizioni Smasher. Two of his novels have been translated into English, L'oceano nel pozzo by Damiano Petropaolo with the title The Ocean in the Well, and La stanza segreta by Douglas Campbell and Leonardo Sbrocchi with the title The Secret Room. He has also authored 2 academic books and numerous research articles. Please help me in welcoming Nino Famà.
Thank you, Christine. Anyways, I will be reading from this book, Don Gaudenzio, and there's a story in there which with this title, Don Gaudenzio, which gives the title to the whole volume. What I'll be reading is a small piece of the story, obviously, with the time we have, and but this is the whole book, and this story that I'm reading, it's in this book, okay? Don Gaudenzio. Quella mattina sua moglie vide Quella mattina sua moglie lo vide seduto davanti alla finestra, lo sguardo fisso sulle campagne che si estendevano al di là della bruma. I suoi occhi non si erano soffermati sulla vegetazione primaverile che rivestiva di verde le colline circostanti, né sull'azzurro del mare che si vedeva a poca distanza, ma sui mandorli in fiore che lui stesso aveva piantato proprio lì vicino al casolare. Pioveva, la caligine sovrastava le cime delle montagne, mentre al lato del mare le nuvole si erano quasi totalmente diradate e incominciavano a mostrare squarci d'azzurro. Un sicuro segno che la pioggia non sarebbe continuata a lungo. L'animo di Don Gaudenzio veniva appagato dal ticchettio delle gocce d'acqua che sbattevano contro il vetro della finestra e dal fruscio della pioggia che percuoteva gli alberi e trafiggeva la terra. Don Gaudenzio era un ometto di statura bassa, corporatura esile, la schiena un po' curva dopo una vita di duro lavoro nelle campagne. Aveva superato gli 80 anni, ma la sua pelle era liscia come se il tempo gli fosse rimbalzato sul corpo senza lasciare traccia del suo indelebile trascorrere. Era nato lì, a Toloma, quel villaggio sull'altopiano collinare cinto da due fiumi, in eterno abbraccio. Aveva imparato a comunicare con gli animali, con gli alberi. Sapeva in anticipo se pioveva o faceva bel tempo. Sapeva se era un'annata d'abbondanza o di miseria. Aveva sempre prediletto la vita solitaria e l'unico suo amico fedele era l'asino che l'accompagnava ovunque andasse. Dopo un po' la pioggia era quasi cessata. Un odore di polvere inumidita saliva dalla terra bagnata. Un sapore pastoso di fanghiglia gli entrava in bocca, gli invadeva i pori, gli trafiggeva la pelle, come se la sua esistenza non fosse così diversa di quella di un albero che succhia linfa dalla terra. A volte si arrampicava su un albero e rimaneva per ore rannicchiato su un ramo tra le foglie, meditando chissà su quali misteri. I contadini di Toloma venivano spesso da Don Gaudenzio a chiedergli consigli. Don Gaudenzio, eh, domani vorrei vendemmiare. Che tempo farà? Allora Don Gaudenzio guardava il cielo, lanciava lo sguardo verso l'orizzonte, controllava se ci fosse qualche nuvola, ne osservava il colore e poi rispondeva: Sì, figliolo, puoi vendemmiare, farà bel tempo. Diceva un altro, chiedeva un altro: Don Gaudenzio, devo seminare il grano. Semino ora o è meglio aspettare? Don Gaudenzio rispondeva che la terra è come una donna. Bisogna sapere quando è pronta per ricevere il seme. Allora consigliava di farlo subito o di attendere. Insomma, Don Gaudenzio dava consigli a tutti e non sbagliava mai, come se avesse pieno accesso a tutto ciò che il Padre Eterno decideva di fare. Una mattina del mese di maggio, Don Gaudenzio si svegliò con un prurito al collo, un pizzicore alla cervice, ma trascorse la giornata senza farci caso, senza avvertire alcun disagio. Passati alcuni giorni, però, lì dove prima c'era il prurito, ora era evidente un gonfiore che gli provocava anche un acuto dolore. A nulla servirono gli impacchi di erbe, di fango e gli altri rimedi che aveva sempre usato con buon esito. Non dimostrò nessuno sgomento, nessuno stupore, quando alcuni giorni dopo poté osservare che qualcosa veniva fuori dalla protuberanza la punta appena visibile d'un germoglio che lui riusciva a toccare con la mano. Un fiore, un asparago, pensò. Dopo alcune settimane gli amici poterono determinare che ciò che cresceva sul collo di Don Gaudenzio era un albero. All'inizio era apparso come un piccolo stelo, ma col passare del tempo, man mano che apparivano le prime foglie, capirono che si trattava di un minuscolo albero di mandorlo. Il dolore che inizialmente aveva infastidito Don Gaudenzio andò placandosi man mano che il germoglio finì di penetrare la pelle. La piccola pianta non causava problemi particolari quando Don Gaudenzio lavorava o dormiva. Ciò che risultava difficile era sopportare le ciance dei tolomesi. Alcuni provavano sincera compassione per Don Gaudenzio, altri si beffavano di lui, mentre i ragazzi lo guardavano incuriositi, lo seguivano, mormoravano tra di loro e poi sbottavano in fragorose risate. Insomma, Don Gaudenzio era diventato l'attrazione del villaggio che più faceva spettacolare. Incominciò ad arrivare la gente prima dai paraggi, poi dai villaggi confinanti e dai paesi vicini, nei quali si era sparsa la voce che a Toloma viveva un uomo sul cui collo era germogliato un albero. All'inizio erano pochi quelli che venivano, ma col passare del tempo, soprattutto la domenica, la strada che portava alla casa di Don Gaudenzio diventava un via vai di curiosi. La gente arrivava a piedi, in groppa agli asini, cavalcando muli e si fermava davanti alla casa di Don Gaudenzio fino a quando non avesse soddisfatto la propria curiosità, cioè fino a quando non avesse visto con i propri occhi la grande meraviglia, l'uomo sul cui collo era spuntato un albero. Veniva tanta gente a Toloma che un bel giorno eh, i vicini di Don Gaudenzio incominciarono a vendere ai forestieri carne di maiale bollita o cotta al forno. E quando la sera i visitatori andavano via, le strade rimanevano piene di carte, cocci di bottiglie rotte, ossa di maiale ed escrementi di muli, di somari e anche umani. Ma la gente non si lamentava, pensava alla prosperità che un solo uomo aveva procurato a Toloma. Col passare del tempo ci fu chi pensò di vendere delle immagini dell'uomo albero come delle reliquie, così che ogni visitatore potesse far ritorno al proprio villaggio con delle prove di quello che stava accadendo a Toloma. Tutto ciò venne celebrato dalle persone più autorevoli di Toloma come uno degli avvenimenti più straordinari del secolo, che avrebbe portato prosperità e ricchezza all'ormai famoso villaggio. Don Gaudenzio rimaneva imperturbato, ignaro dei festeggiamenti spafaldi, lontano dalla sarabanda che asseragliava il villaggio. Sebbene non si fosse mai lamentato, erano straordinari il silenzio e la solitudine con cui viveva quei giorni. Il mandorlo crebbe e arrivò il momento in cui fu necessario potarlo, tagliare un ramoscello qua, uno stelo là, per permettere a Don Gaudenzio di continuare a entrare e uscire dalla porta di casa. L'alberello però non causava alcun problema quando lui si trovava nelle campagne, dove continuava a fare gli stessi lavori che aveva sempre fatto. Come sempre, partiva da casa la mattina presto a cavallo dell'asino e si recava nei campi per poi ritornare quando era già buio. Coltivava i suoi terreni, seminava il grano, zappava le vigne, faceva la raccolta delle olive, caricava la legna sull'asino e la portava a casa per cucinare o per usarla nel caminetto durante le fredde giornate d'inverno. Faceva tutto come prima, o secondo lui meglio di prima. Mangiava, beveva vino e si sentiva forte e abile come non lo era mai stato. I ragazzi che lo incontravano per strada lo salutavano e lui rispondeva con quella voce da fantasma. Buongiorno, ragazzi. Quando era già passato, si giravano, lo guardavano con quell'albero potato a ombrello e non potevano trattenersi dalle ghignazzanti risate. Don Gaudenzio proseguiva imperturbato il suo cammino. Forse non li udiva, o forse li udiva, ma i loro atteggiamenti lo lasciavano indifferente. Mi fermo qui. Grazie, ho finito.
Thank you, Nino. Our next speaker is Terri Favro. Terri Favro's writing is inspired by a lifelong obsession with science fiction, comic books, robots, steampunk, and Greek and Roman myths. Terri is the author of 4 novels, including The Sisters Sputnik and Sputnik's Children, a Globe and Mail 100 book that was also longlisted for the CBC Canada Reads. She is also the author of the popular science book Generation Robot, A Century of Science Fiction, Fact, and Speculation, and collaborates on graphic novels, most recently Cold City, inspired by a true crime in 1933 Toronto. A finalist for the CBC Literary Prize for Creative Nonfiction, Terri's essays and short fiction have been published in numerous literary magazines and anthologies. In 2025, her horror story, Rubber Road, will be published in an anthology from Dundurn Press. Raised in the Niagara region, Terri now lives in Toronto and blogs at terrifavro.ca. So welcome, Terri.
Thanks so much, Christine, and also Mia Pia, and all of you for zooming in this afternoon. So as you can tell by the introduction, my writing is heavily influenced by the world of science fiction, in part because I grew up with robots, and not just imaginary ones. My father built robots in our basement, our backyard, and our vineyard in the 1960s and 1970s. So I kind of grew up in an Italian-Canadian version of the Jetsons. My book, Generation Robot, was inspired by my father, which inspired me to go on and talk to other roboticists. And I'm going to do a short reading from Generation Robot. And I promise you, every word of it is absolutely true. This is called Monolith, 1968. My father often came home from work with blood on his clothes. Sometimes his own blood, usually somebody else's. Every day he walked among machines that ate men alive. A dangling tie could strangle an engineer bending over to inspect a machine. A loose cuff caught in a press could lead to the amputation of a worker's hand. No big surprise that Dad only wore clip-on bow ties, short-sleeved shirts, and leather watch straps, thin enough to snap under pressure. His wedding ring had been tucked away in a dresser drawer since his honeymoon. He'd seen too many guys dismembered, scalped, blinded, and electrocuted by being snagged by their clothing, jewelry, and hair. An electrician and a natural problem solver. These days, he'd probably have his own YouTube channel called The Machine Whisperer, Dad had been promoted to his employer's engineering department to keep the interconnected lines of machinery and their human operators in perpetual motion. He was the go-to guy to fix breakdowns day or night. One of his unpleasant responsibilities was to get the line up and running in the aftermath of workplace accidents that might cause a machine to malfunction or had been caused by a malfunctioning machine. I could tell when someone had been mauled by one of the mechanical monsters by the look on Dad's face when he came home for lunch, a legacy of my family's Italian tradition of gathering for a big midday meal. On bad days, he'd sit at the table silently, his starched white shirt stained with blood and grease. We could see him struggling not to unburden himself on us until he'd finally mutter something like, "Hell of a thing happened this morning." Mom, anticipating what he might say next, would warn, "Not while we're eating," and ladle more penne arrabbiata onto his plate. My grandmother, Nonna Tina, Dad's mother, would stare at him uncomprehendingly from her wheelchair at the opposite end of the table. "What happened, Dad?" As the youngest and last kid at the lunch table, I was the only one who wanted to hear all the gory details. By 1968, Dad was censoring himself less often. He would run his hand over his balding head and talk. An aluminum ladder against an iron catwalk, and a spark. Boom, a man was electrocuted. A worker's arm caught by his sleeve. Boom, arm gone. A shard of hot metal flying straight into a machine operator's eye. Dad suspected he'd never see out of it again. "Tea," my mom would warn, using the nickname he had picked up in school because no one could pronounce his Italian name, Attilio. My father, usually chatty, funny, and affectionate, would press his lips together, stare at his plate, and swallow the horror of what he'd seen along with his lunch. Afterwards, he'd change his bloody shirt and go back to work. Given the sometimes grisly nature of Dad's job, his enthusiasm was understandable when he came home for lunch one day and told us that he had been put in charge of Unimate, the world's first factory robot, manufactured by Unimation of Danbury, Connecticut. My mom made a face. "Robots? Okay, it'll steal jobs from the other guys in the neighborhood." "It'll save lives," insisted Dad. He explained that Unimate had been programmed to do one particularly dangerous job: lift a massively heavy chunk of hot metal out of a mold, dunk it into coolant, and put it in a press to form the steering column of a car over and over again. Assigning this one nasty, dirty, tiring task to a robot meant that a human, prone to exhaustion and inattention, didn't have to risk life or limbs doing it. Besides, Dad reasoned, the workers replaced by Unimate would get new jobs, programming, building, and maintaining robots, work that would become increasingly important after the moon landing, when NASA started building lunar colonies for settlers. "Maquet, lunar colonies," muttered Mom darkly, which was her usual response to my father's crackpot ideas about living on the moon. I glanced at Nona, hunched over her meal in silence. She watched the Apollo missions on TV with a disbelief verging on hostility. "It was all just play acting," she insisted, and she couldn't remember things the way she used to. She was even starting to forget how to speak English. Senility, the doctor called it. She'd broken her hip on a fall down the cellar stairs, carrying an armful of laundry, and despite my father's repeated attempts to get her to walk again, she was stuck in a wheelchair where she billowed into a big Buddha of a woman, too heavy for my mom or even my dad to lift. If there had ever been a fire or a nuclear attack, there was no way to get Nona out of the house. She was marooned on the main floor, rolling between 4 rooms: her bedroom, the laundry room that Dad had retrofitted as a handicap bathroom, the kitchen, and the rarely used living room. She could sit outside on the back stoop where Mom hung laundry, but couldn't get herself to ground level to our yard or the garden or the vineyard beyond it. Dad's robot might be able to save men's lives, but it couldn't do anything for Nona, I thought, underestimating my father's willingness to solve problems with whatever he had at hand. Dad was an unlikely candidate to be put in charge of a space-age innovation like Unimate. Born in a non-electrified stone cottage in a windswept corner of the Italian Alps in 1920, the year the word robot was coined by playwright Karl Čapek, Dad received a haphazard Depression-era education after his family immigrated to Canada. He studied to be an electrician by mail through international correspondence schools of Scranton, Pennsylvania, famous for advertising their technical courses in the back pages of comic books and magazines. MIT, it wasn't. Skipping ahead of it. Dad gave Unimate a not very original nickname, Robbie, not for Forbidden Planet's Robbie the robot, but for Roberta. Like a car, ship, or any other beautiful machine, in Dad's eyes, the robot was feminine. Its inner workings as mysterious, intriguing, and worthy of exploration as a woman's body. Sure enough, Robbie surprised everyone by occasionally going haywire. As a pre-programmed robot, she could do one action repeatedly, pick a part out of a mold, pivot, dunk. Problems arose when she confronted anything even slightly unusual. For example, a variance in heat might make a piece of metal more difficult to remove from the mold. Whenever this happened, Robbie interrupted her smooth flow of pick, pivot, dunk to haul back with her shiny 4,000-pound arm and hurl a blisteringly hot piece of metal across the shop floor, narrowly missing the heads of assembly line workers. Dad suddenly found himself playing astronaut Bowman to Robbie's Hal. His solution was cheap, simple, and effective. Since the robot was pitching parts, he'd surround her with baseball nets with which to catch them. It was my earliest example of what can happen when a new technology meets a problem solver with a creative imagination. Robbie captured my imagination too. The way Dad talked about her made me think that she looked like one of the robots I was used to seeing on TV, a whirring mechanical biped, like the B9 environmental control robot on Lost in Space. It was exciting to imagine such a creature working alongside Dad at the plant, which I only ever glimpsed at the Employee Association Christmas party every year, a fun-filled, glittery, gift-laden orgy of sweet treats and wrapped toys presented to each employee's child according to their gender and age. Every year, at some point during that party, we were all made to troop through Plant 2, the factory floor. I don't know why they let a straggling line of kids in their best party clothes, high on sugar and the off-gassing of polymers from new plastic toys, through what could be described as William Blake's vision of industrial hell, an acre of deafening machines, grimy with ash, going full tilt on a vast expanse of oil-soaked gray concrete. During our short walkabout, we kids saw and heard and smelled the iron wheels turning the machinery of our lives. It was like walking into the Wizard of Oz and seeing the glittering curtain pulled aside to reveal the old swindler hidden behind it, working knobs and yanking levers to keep the great Oz alive. A giant mechanism that put food on our tables, Buster Brown shoes on our feet, and 25-pound turkeys in our ovens every Christmas. It would still be years before ear protection was required in the plant. In the 60s, the workers simply went deaf. As we kids walked through Plant 2, we clamped our hands over our ears against the noise and screamed in pain. No one noticed because the sound of machinery drowned us out. I went to those parties year after year until I turned 12. That also happened to be the year that Robbie came to the shop floor, and Dad started puttering around with robotics to help solve problems he faced at home. Job 1, was to build an automated device that could move my wheelchair-bound grandmother out of the house. As the caregiver for Robbie, the rebellious robot, Dad could easily order a few spare parts and smuggle them home from work. All it took was a doctored purchase order or two. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Terri. And now I would like to introduce you to our next speaker, Anna Foschi Ciampolini. Anna was born in Florence and lives in Vancouver. Anna is an award-winning short story writer, freelance journalist, and translator. She co-edited 3 anthologies, and her works were published in Canada, Italy, the US, and Costa Rica. Anna is a founding member of the Association of Italian-Canadian Writers and a co-founder of the Bressani Literary Prize. She is an inductee in the Italian Cultural Center's Hall of Fame for her cultural and humanitarian activities. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you very much, Christine, for this is a nice presentation, and thank you to everyone in our audience. So today I thought of sort of sharing with you something very unusual during my so-called writing career, because I'm a very improvised. I never went to any writing school. I just started. And I always wrote fiction or essays or literary criticism, but I really never dabbled in poetry, except in a few moments of my life where I just wrote, like without thinking, 3 or 4 poems. And they were forgotten for a long time in the mysterious rooms and secret corners of my computer and in the drawers for their paper form. So they stayed there for a very, very long time, till last year, when I was doing a cleanup of my old files, I came across this file called Anna, 3 poems. Oh, so I read them again and I thought, I have nothing to lose. And I sent one of those poems, actually the 3 of them, to as a submission for the forthcoming anthology based on the Turing conference. I think they have a section for people who were not able to participate. And I thought, I have nothing to lose. They will just throw it in the wastebasket. That's it. To my surprise, one of the poems was appreciated. So I got very bold and signed up for this event, and I thought, I will read those poems. The first one is the one that caught the attention of the anthology editors. They are all quite short, don't worry. I mean, I'm not going to be here forever. And the title is Fra la gente. I have to put my glasses on. Better. Fra la gente. La ragazza che vende caldarroste all'angolo di Pender e Main Street oggi fa buoni affari. È vigilia di Natale, un giorno come un altro a Chinatown, solo che rende più soldi. $3 al cartoccio! Ne vale di più il profumo, irresistibile richiamo d'infanzia. Le tenevamo al caldo da bambini, nella tasca del cappotto, come fai ora tu, porgendomi il frutto carnoso, fumante. Mangiamo in piedi, ridendo, accanto al cestino dei rifiuti, fra la gente che si accalca frettolosa a palpare la merce dei negozi. D'un tratto stringi forte la mia mano e siamo soli, io e te, in un arcobaleno sospeso fra il passato e il futuro che non ci appartengono. Nostro è solo il presente, l'intensità di questo istante perfetto, assoluto, struggente, una sera d'inverno a Chinatown. The second, this is a little bit of a sentimental poem. Well, we all have our own moments. The other two were written in a very different frame of mind. I came to Canada 40 years ago, and I was already, I had a life. I was a grown-up woman with a child and everything. And despite having traveled with my husband in different countries and lived in different countries, I was still immensely attached to Italy and to my city, to Florence. When I came to Canada and I realized that it was going to be an irreversible change in my life, that it wasn't going back to Florence, it was a very, very intense feeling. It was something that it took me years to sort of deal with. I had the good fortune, and I'm very grateful, that I was able to go back to my country, to Italy, to our country, almost every year for a long time. And not in Florence, in a very quaint, small, much smaller village at the outskirts of Florence called the Figline Valdarno. And sort of a strange things happened. The more I was going back and the more I started to feel disconnected, the more I started to feel that I didn't belong there anymore, that I was a person in between. And one day, in Figline Valdarno, which is on the river Arno, especially in October, September, the sort of the fall season, it can be very rainy, like in Vancouver. And it could be even foggy, like in Vancouver. So that morning, something completely unexpected came, and I just sat down and typed on the computer I had over there this story, called Il cielo di Vancouver. Ho nostalgia della mia città lontana, così pulita e chiara, degli innocenti mattini di azzurro solcato dal volo dei gabbiani e del suo calmo, verde respiro di foresta senza memoria, perché la sua memoria è quella del tempo, non quella degli uomini, dei loro antichi odi e delle loro guerre fratricide. Qui in paese c'è la lapide di un martire, e poi un'altra, e un'altra ancora. Una stele o un monumento in ogni piazza d'Italia. Tanto è stato il sangue versato per secoli e tanto il dolore sofferto, così tanto che se n'è imbevuta ogni zolla di terra e ancora ne duole la ferita, nonostante l'indifferenza che l'odierno benessere regala. Eppure è da qui che sono cominciata e questa è la mia vera terra. Questo selciato di vecchia pietra dove cammino, questo linguaggio limpido e sonoro che odo all'angolo del caffè nella piazza grande, dalla gente che fa la spesa, questa mai sopita ribellione. La giovane città, di là dal mare, nuova, spavalda, distante mezzo mondo, ha pochi monumenti e poco da ricordare. Fontane dappertutto, una statua di bronzo per Terry Fox, l'atleta ragazzo, un busto per Lord Stanley e i totem, scolpiti per l'eternità. Quando sono ritornata nella mia terra e ho cercato di riannodare i fili interrotti della mia esistenza e dei miei ricordi, vi ho trovato invece la spiaggia di Ambleside e le luci di Metrotown. Le voci di ieri si erano fatte distanti e indifferenti, come due vecchi amanti che non hanno più niente da dirsi. The last piece, the last one, is kind of contradicting. As I said, I lived in a dimension of duality for all of my life as an immigrant in Canada. You know, my life in Canada, I was a first generation. I tried everything to integrate, to adapt, and I succeeded. I really feel that whatever I did here is meaningful, and honestly, maybe I could not have accomplished that if I had stayed in Italy. A long time ago, I think Antonio D'Alfonso wrote a book called The Other Shore, and sometimes I think I wouldn't be the same person if I had stayed on the other shore. So I'm grateful. Let's not, no kidding. I'm sincere. But sometimes those feelings are contradictory, and they just come out, and I learned to accept them, to welcome, not as a weakness, but as a proof that we are enriched, we are blessed, in the sense that we could experience something as, two different cultures, different dimensions, have explored other horizons. And I don't know if I would have been able to do that if I had stayed in Florence. And Florence is still in my heart, always been, will be. It's the city that I consider, no offense for any other cities, but for me, is the most beautiful in the world. But Vancouver has taken roots, despite sometimes moments like I'm talking about in this last poem, poetry, well, whatever, words on a page called Coffee Rituals. Coffee Rituals. Ci sono strade che ti avviluppano e odorano di antichi segreti, del profumo dolce del sesso, delle parole acri dette in un impeto di collera tanto tempo fa, dietro le mura, nell'ottusa carne dei palazzi. Odorano come un mattino di tanti altri mattini, quando, ancora languidi dagli abbracci notturni, ci svegliavamo anelando la sversata di energia del primo sorso di caffè nero, aspirandone l'aroma, storditi d'amore, mentre fuori i gatti sapienti, con occhi saggi e guardinghi, sedevano sui davanzali, fragilani di rosso scarlatto. Strade che svoltano e scompaiono bruscamente dentro l'irraggiungibile paesaggio della giovinezza perduta, che ora, ma è troppo tardi, e troppa è la lontananza. Cerco di riafferrare, stringendo fra le dita la tazzina di caffè Torrefazione Italia, in questo terzo, asettico, azzurro, pallido mattino a West Vancouver. Grazie. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Anna. Our next speaker is Connie Guzzo McParland. Connie is co-director of Guernica Editions and holds a BA in Italian literature and a master's degree in creative writing from Concordia University. She is the author of 2 novels, The Girls of Piazza d'Amore, followed by its sequel, The Women of Saturn, both translated into Italian as Le Donne di Saturno. Her biography, an opera in 3 acts, was published simultaneously in French as Un opéra en 3 actes. In 2023, Guernica Editions, in collaboration with the Italian publisher Le Flaneur, published her translation of the Italian novel La dodicesima stanza by Teresa Antonacci. Her works have received various awards, the Concordia David McKee Award in Creative Writing from her creative thesis Girotondo, second prize by Premio Letterario Casteria in Casteria, Italy for an excerpt from her first novel, finalist for the Quebec Writers Federation First Book Award for The Girls of Piazza d'Amore, special jury award and second place award by the Concorso Letterario Internazionale Città di Crucoli for the translated Le Donne di Saturno, as well as the Premio Vitruvio special award by the jury and Menzione d'Onore for the same novel. She is currently working on both a new novel as well as a creative nonfiction project. Welcome, Connie.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to the AICW for organizing this reading. Okay, so I won't be reading from any of the works that you've mentioned, and I have started a couple of new projects, but they're still too new and fresh to talk about. So I've decided to read from my first published short story. I don't usually write short stories, and but this is how this one came about. In 2019, I attended the Italian Diaspora Studies Seminar at the University of Calabria, and I also gave a writing workshop. After that, I spent a week in my hometown with an elderly aunt who was still very alert and loved telling stories. There were mostly stories of how different life for women had been in the past, stories of women she had heard about from her mother or some that she had witnessed herself in her youth. And most dealt with marriages, children, women who had been subservient to the men of their families. There was one story that really left an impression because it was quite different from any of the others and inspired me to compose this short story, which was then published in the anthology celebrating Calabria that contains the writings of all the participants of that seminar. Now, the story is based on a real event. However, I did fictionalize it for thematic effect. It's the wedding costume, Calabria, circa 1930. Except for the buzzing of flies, the house had regained its fragile quietness until he flung open the shutters, yanked the wedding costume from the bottom of the trunk, and threw it at his young wife, now moaning softly on the bed. Only 6 months earlier, she had caressed the costume with longing before folding and putting it back with the rest of her trousseau. Now you cry? Pepe raised his thick hand, but stopped short of striking her. How long had Francesca lain on the bed? The white muslin sheets from the trousseau she had so lovingly embroidered with delicate flowers and butterflies now smelled of her sweat and blood. She had lost track of the time, the minutes, hours, days since she had regained consciousness, only to find that her swollen belly had emptied, but no hungry baby sucked on her full and sore breasts. She had refrained from sobbing loudly, afraid to break the stillness that had fallen in the house after Rosa left the house. It was a boy, her mother-in-law Rosa had announced in her loud and screechy voice. Then she left without any consoling words or even a warm cup of tea to soothe the young wife's hollow insides. No one in her family came to assist her either. Only Anna, her closest neighbor, brought her bowls of chicken soup. The chicken, Anna whispered, was a gift from Francesca's mother, Teresa, but she was not to tell anyone. It was a boy. These words made Francesca's inability to give him life that much more shameful. Now you cry, Pepe said, taunting her. Where were you when it was time to do your duty? It was a strapping boy with a big square head and thick legs. Anna told her the day after she came back from the fog. He looked just like his grandfather Ciccio and the 3 sons to whom Rosa had given birth without any fuss or the help of a midwife. But the young wife's narrow hips and her even narrower passage between her legs were not built to give birth to Ciccio's son's son. It's how Rosa explained it. Moreover, Rosa stressed, she had warned her son beforehand. She's too delicate for us. But he had eloped with her anyway. He had been drawn to her quiet demeanor, her soft voice and thin waist. She was a slender vine that he could bend in shape as it grew. He's a cafone, too coarse for our family, her father had told her. We're a family of mastri, and you want to marry a peasant who only comes to town to sell beans? And who knew where his people came from? Her father had responded when she tried to convince him that Pepe's tall frame, square shoulders, tawny head of hair, and green eyes looked anything but coarse to her, especially when compared to the short, stout, dark-haired tailor in her neighborhood who wanted to marry her. She eloped with him anyway. There was no other way to marry him without her father's consent. Her family never spoke to her after she brought them shame, not only by eloping, but by parading around pregnant only a few weeks after marrying him in the early hours of morning without a wedding procession and mass. Her mother, though, with Anna's help, managed to smuggle the trunk with the wedding costume and trousseau out of the house against her husband's wishes. The church bell rang once. What day and time is it? Francesca asked. It's time to get dressed and go to the procession, her husband ordered. I can't stand on my feet, she said, pleading. How can I go to a procession after? She was unable to finish the sentence. After what? He yelled. Say it. After you fell asleep and were unable to push our son out. That's what. I fainted. She had pushed, panted, screamed for her mother for hours, but no amount of poking and pleading by the midwife, who pushed harder, could force a baby to come out as nature intended. The one-room house had turned into a chamber of shrieks, curses, and pain. At the end, the world blackened out for her when a doctor had to pull the baby out per force, bloody and dead. You fainted? Well, now you're awake. You heard the bell? The procession will start in 20 minutes. I'm going ahead to carry the Adolorata. You get dressed and follow the procession. Maybe the Madonna will forgive you and give you more strength next time. She remembered. So it must be Good Friday, when the weeping Madonna, dressed in a black cloak and still weeping for her dead son, is hauled on the shoulders of the strongest men in the village and paraded around the roads and alleys of the town, looking for her son's body. On Easter Day, at the Affrontata, she would be brought out again and carried uphill towards the main square by the same men, where another set of bearers would run towards her with the resurrected Jesus on their shoulders, accompanied by the village band and applause from the onlookers. Mother and son would meet and be reunited again forever. The Madonna would drop her black cloak and show her luxurious clothes, her neck adorned with gold chains, left by the woman who throughout the year had asked for favors or had left for the Americas. Who but the Adolorata could intercede for the woman? She was the image of quiet resignation and resilience in the face of the pain she had suffered and could grant forgiveness, strength, and grace to all mothers. The church bell rang twice. Time to get ready and leave for the procession. Francesca stared at the wedding costume at the foot of the bed. Would it not be a shameful spectacle for her to go out wearing it while she was still grieving? The colorful costume was only worn on the wedding day, at other people's wedding, a joyful religious feast, and to be buried in, never on Good Friday, and never after the loss of a son. The Adolorata wore a black cloak until Easter. She couldn't understand the change in her husband. He had been gentle the night they eloped, happy and kind while she carried his child. He'd even agreed half-heartedly to move from his parents' home at the farm and rent an empty house at the edge of town, close enough to his mother, but far enough so he wouldn't have to listen to her constant complaints of his young wife who just couldn't keep up with her at the farm. It was a one-room stone house isolated from neighbors, in a parcel of land, in an uncultivated field, strewn with cacti, sow thistle, and other wild plants. But Francesca loved the sense of calm she felt cocooned in the small room with Pepe, while the hot Scirocco wind blew all around them. He was taciturn by nature, and for that she had felt at ease with him from the very beginning. But now she wished he'd say more. Was he sending her out to the procession in her wedding costume to humiliate and punish her? Or was it just another of his family's odd customs? She dared not disobey him, not after she had failed him and his family. She dragged herself out of bed, wiped her face and her swollen red eyes with a wet cloth from the basin the midwife had used. She draped the flannel panno over the white long shirt she had slept in, slipped the heavy satin light pink pleated skirt over her head, then put on the corset with the dangling ribbons, the embroidered apron, the lace mandile over her disheveled braids, and cover her head with the white satin mancale. This much would allow her to cover her head and the face with a shawl like the weeping Addolorata. She walked to Anna's house, but the woman had already left for the procession. Her young daughter volunteered to walk her to the church. The bell rang 3 times as they inched slowly towards the church and joined the astonished Anna and the procession. With her head bowed and eyes looking down, Francesca pretended not to notice the people staring at her. But how could they not? She was the only one wearing a white shawl in a sea of black ones. Salve, o Regina, piena di grazie, the women chanted as they followed the black-clad Madonna along the streets of the town. Tu sei benedetta fra tutte le donne, e benedetto il frutto del tuo seno, Gesù. At the main square, midway through the procession, Anna begged Francesca to let her accompany her back home, but she stubbornly insisted on finishing the course. Holding on tight to her arms, she trudged back to the church as if pulled by newfound strength. She pushed her way through the throngs of parishioners to kiss the feet of the Addolorata, still held up on the men's shoulders. She only raised her eyes as she passed by her husband and held a firm gaze at him for a few instants. Only then did she let Anna walk her back home to lay her on the bed to rest. On Sunday Mass, before the second procession in his homily, the priest took aim at the shamelessness of some young woman who dared to soil the honor of the families and the purity of the Madonna. The woman looked for sign of the young wife, but she was nowhere to be seen. As they trekked up the hill again to follow the Addolorata, they whispered among themselves and wondered what possessed the young woman to come out on Good Friday, wearing her wedding costume and daring the priest, when only a few months earlier the priest had refused to have her wear it on her wedding day. Some also reproached the carelessness of the town butcher, who, while carrying the slaughtered Easter lamb on his shoulders from the farm to his shop, disgorged drops of blood all along the cobblestone roads of the town. Later, the man in the osteria looked out for Pepe, but Pepe was unusually absent that Sunday. On the Monday after Easter, as families packed sausages, frittatas, and wine for the traditional Pascone picnics in the field, the church bells rang in mourning. Soon the word spread that the young wife of Cicio's son had died a week after giving birth to a stillborn baby boy. Anna and her daughter, at Teresa's urging, offered Pepe to help dress Francesca for the burial. They were startled to find her still lying in the pastel pink costume, now caked with blood on the bed. After Pascone, it was the postman who solved the mystery of the stains of blood he had noticed people had noticed on the ground since Good Friday. The butcher had denied blame. The postman told everyone he met on his route that the trail of blood ran in faint and sparse drops from the church to the main square and back to the church, but then continued heavier and in an uninterrupted flow toward the lower part of town, ending with dried blobs of blood at Cicio's son's doorstep. At the house, where the town ends and the scrub begins, and where among the overgrown weeds, slender stems of wild poppies blow and bend in the wind. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. And last but not least, I would like to introduce you to Michael Mirolla, the author of a clutch of novels, plays, film scripts, and short story and poetry collections. Michael Mirolla's publications include a novella, The Last News Vendor, winner of the 2020 Hamilton Literary Award for Fiction, as well as 3 Bersani Prizes. The novel Berlin, the poetry collection, The House on 14th Avenue, and the short story collection, Lessons in Relationship Diet. His latest poetry collection, At the End of the World, was shortlisted for the 2022 Hamilton Literary Award. In the fall of 2019, Michael served a 3-month writer's residency at the historic Joe Kogawa House. A symposium on Michael's writing was held in Toronto on May 25th, 2023. In September of 2023, Michael took part in a writer's residency in Olot, Catalonia. In July 2024, Michael will participate in a one-month writer's residency near Barcelona. Born in Italy and growing up in Montreal, Michael now makes his home outside the town of Gananoque in the Thousand Islands area of Ontario. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much for that. You read the whole thing. I was hoping you'd cut it down somewhat. All right, I'm going to read some poems from some of my collections, starting with from a collection called Light and Time. And this is The Art of Walking. The roadkill rises, eyes rimmed in red, the raccoons, the rabbits, the rats, and you. We dwell on the edge of somewhere, like angels, perhaps, flirting between possibilities, like angels, maybe, licking each other's wounds. A gaunt cow stands knee-deep in a subdivided field, stares out in the fervent hope of slaughterhouse, that quick, clean cut to the jugular. Here the signs come quick and fast and furious. Oops, you've just missed Camelot, an exclusive enclave for the millionaire in each of us. Sheep manure for sale, by appointment only, call art. The highway leans hard into the wind, its dull roar like a grinding machine for the future. It spits out godliness, detached housing, luminosity, evergreen rugs, one-legged flamingos stalking the elusive fast food wrapper, cars snapping at the heels of brittle corn stalks. The highway leans hard into the wind. Behind it, civilization's stubborn convoy, impressions of faces against taut plastic, crucifixes around the necks of mourning doves, vacuum sealed. In the distance, the hills continue to ovulate. The trees strain against their leashes. The windmills ride off half-cocked. The snakes, the skunks, the squirrels are rising. And we live on the edge of nowhere in a quiet cul-de-sac. We reside on the edge of nowhere in a quiet cul-de-sac. The sign at the end of the street, roadkill ahead. And this one's called Moth and Trees, November in Taylor Creek Park. On a day like today, ice receding momentarily from Earth's taut brow, the moths rise from their crystalline sleep. In the fibrous air, they fumble on cracked and bitter wings. They flit between raindrop spears, dirty pieces of cloud along the river's snaky edges. On a day like today, the willows hug their broken limbs draped in polyethylene. High above sawtooth ice, the doggies' scoop bags swing in the militant breeze, larval passengers in their cryogenic containers, sniffing the air for rebirth. Not yet, they cry, not yet. On a day like today, a body carries its own dappled sunlight through the flash flood waters, face down, mouth agape, filtering the ancient mud. It searches for non-saccharine truths. The moths alight for a moment, glow translucent in the imported sunlight before rising once more to cling to rusted tree jackets. And these from the house on 14th Avenue, which just happens to be where I am today, The Kiss. Yesterday, just before noon, my mother kissed my father. I couldn't help the thought. Last time they kissed, an anniversary pose, upright and suited at a banquet table, glass of wine, talismanic in rock-hard hand. Now she kisses him goodbye as he lies wrapped in a thin sheet from which blue-veined feet extrude. Crucifix arms form V's above a scrub-ribbed chest. Jokingly, I ask myself, is he one of the 5 who'll survive to found a city, or doomed to crickethood? At 3 o'clock, my mother sits on the edge of her bed and prays. When I ask her for what, she lifts black shadow eyes to the ceiling and reminds me of the stunted fate of orphans. I think then of lips sparking towards each other, reaching Zeno-like to cross the void, and of a dab of wine to quench that final inevitable thirst. This one's called Planting Done, She Moves On. I offered to pull her back through time, away from the pavement ledge that once so solid now slithers off in ragged chunks of black, like a not quite finished Escher woodcut, covered in the splatter of apple blossoms, away from the ever-weakening echo of a voice that, having defied all odds, continues to call her name, continues 7 decades from its first incantation to plead for preferential treatment, to demand her undying attention, even as it shrivels to a parchment crackle, an enfeebled lamp swaying in a hiccup world. But despite the widening gap between house and terrace, the lava flow of images that merge past and present before her eyes, the certainty of being swallowed up as earth and cobblestone crumble around her, she pays heed to neither son nor husband, to neither offer nor pleading. And though her face may sag mirrored in a glass-topped table, her fingertips may ache, pallid and crimped from a lack of blood, she sits unperturbed beneath the masseria trellis. She knows that, having stowed the seeds safely under soil to give them one last hope of permanence, her task is done. It doesn't matter then that the light appears not quite natural in the late afternoon, that the air shimmers and the ground quirks, that the birds and the squirrels huddle on flimsy limbs as if in prayer, that the snails retreat into their fractal homes, that the lantern in the window taps out a diminishing code, that the call back through time has lost its way, that the mortar to hold things together is softening. What's left is the vision of a gaunt woman who floats breezily by on a grassy raft, clutching a sail of cerulean tablecloth. Behind her, embryos breaking the earth, and a flock of apple blossoms rising to the tree that first gave them life. On coming to the end of Monsieur Proust, towards the final pages of Le Temps Retrouvé, my father stands scarecrow to the wind, purblind, ragged, duct-taped walking stick impaled, quivering in the ground beside him, and leans his quasi-centenarian foot on the head of the pitchfork. In slow motion, the rusty tines slide into the stitch of earth to prise open its rich, constricted smile, to dredge a chain of rictal memories. In the canting afternoon, sky in patches behind him, he feels the old birds lift for a moment, raising him up to where the sod, unable to get a firm enough hold and lacking the reach to pull him back down, is left to nip idly at his mud-packed heels, easing the fork once more into the heart of friable loam. He escapes yet again to await the turning of some final leaf. And this is from At the End of the World. The bear. When you hear the sound of scraping beyond a cave's orifice to the outer world, think again before you enter. The warmth, the smell, the heady brew may invite you into a place of origin, a place where fermentation lacks but your quick yeast. Inside, you may find luminescent walls covered with the true signs of art, clasp, square, dove, vase, and the word Rukgabart, rebirth, millennia according into a single moment. From the rutted plateaus of Anatolia to the quick bog zones of the boreal north. Or you may find a creature squatting in the goddess pose as agonized she prepares to insert a careless child back into her womb. And are you next in line? One more sacrifice to help atone for that original chromosomal split. Best to hold back until the scraping ends, the walls pristine, the odors turn to must, the cave abandoned to bats and their echoes, and then to gingerly step in with lantern in hand to light the intimate corners where androgyny failed to stop the great divide. The bones gathered in ceremonial piles wait for their owners to claim them, totems for the journey that lies ahead, a way out of the maze that threatens to undo us all. Gather those marked for you, prepared to carry them to where they no longer matter. And this one's called To a Poet Struggling to Recover Her Words. And this is for Venera. Please note, this is not a metaphor. In the spongy gray room, walls reticulated, bony chair bolted to upheaving floor, spotlight at 10 flickers per minute, she sits. There's a hole in the side of her head. There's a hole where they extracted the overeager building blocks, the out-of-control tidbits of DNA. The incisions were precise, one must assume, but it didn't prevent the words, her words, from escaping into the sterile air. Now, a saintly smile framing her face, She sits in the bony chair inside the spongy gray room with reticulated walls and reaches out to recapture the stray letters that may or may not have survived without her tender care. I sit across from her, spoon-feeding alphabet strands into a hungry mouth, fearful that the words that have kept her whole, that have defined her, that connect her to herself, that have built this gray room, will be unable to make the return journey. Please note, this has not been a metaphor. And just one poem from the new collection that I'm working on right now. This is called To the Fill in the Blank Pool. I'm standing at the edge of a tidal pool, at the edge of a mountain-crowned island, at the edge of volcanic rock battered by a sea's deceptively gentle waves, and trying to think of something to say, perhaps something that rhymes with importance. Stance, chance, enhance, dance, romance, faire de lance. Nope, I can't quite get it right. Irony circles like a vulture, and that's nothing to sneeze at. The laughter that squeezes through every available gap in the spaces between tides sounds too much like the holes in your logic. So now that you've gone out as far as you could on this shaky limb, shall we get back to what was troubling us in the first place? Have we ironed out those little concerns? Or has the laughter turned manic, like a distorted bat signal warning of a danger that doesn't exist? Is that a grimace I see reflected in the water, wavering as usual? What exactly do you hope to find in there? The meaning of corners that can't be defined? The brightness heading towards you with an intensity you can't deflect? The worry of picking at your own flesh in the hope things will come clear if someone else is shining the light, that reflected light? Like swimmers' legs in a foreshortening between smoke-filled air and sun-drenched water that turns them into clownish sitcom stars. Ah, so this was a deep pool after all, pulsing back and forth from an ocean that couldn't give a shit about your logic, your tangents, your diversionary tactics. It reaches right in and gets right to the point. I give the salt and I take away the salt. So dive in. The pool shimmers, the moon glimmers, and the tide waits for no one. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. So we have reached the end of the readings for today. We don't have much time for questions, but I'll allow about 5 minutes if anyone has any questions. Please raise your hand. Sorry, I'm just going to change my view so I can see everyone. There. I can see everyone now. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please raise your hands. No. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This event was brought to you by the Association of Italian Canadian Writers, which is run by a group of volunteers. So we welcome donations at any time. Go to the AICW.ca to donate and to find out more about our activities. Our next event of the Established Writers Series will take place on Saturday, May 18th from 2 to 3:15 p.m. And as host, I hope to see you all there, but I also would like to bring to your attention another event that is upcoming, organized by the AICW, and that's our Emerging Creative Voices event, which will take place on Saturday, April 27th at 2 p.m. Okay, so thank you again for sharing your stories with us and for participating and listening.